And I'm Larry Elder. I thought Bibi Netanyahu hit it out of the park.
We are no longer scattered among the nations, powerless to defend ourselves. We've restored our sovereignty in our ancient home. And the soldiers who defend our home have boundless courage. For the first time in 100 generations, we, the Jewish people, can defend ourselves. This is why, as Prime Minister of Israel, I can promise you one more thing. Even if Israel has to stand alone, Israel will stand. But I know that Israel does not stand alone. I know that America stands with Israel. I know that you stand with Israel. You stand with Israel because you know that the story of Israel is not only the story of the Jewish people, but of the human spirit that refuses again and again to succumb to history's horrors. Facing me, right up there in the gallery, overlooking all of us in this august chamber, is the image of Moses. Moses led our people from slavery to the gates of the Promised Land. And before the people of Israel entered the land of Israel, Moses gave us a message that has steeled our resolve for thousands of years. I leave you with his message today. Chizku v'imtzu, al tiru ve'al ta'artzu mipnehem. Be strong and resolute, neither fear nor dread them. My friends, may Israel and America always stand together, strong and resolute. May we neither fear nor dread the challenges ahead. May we face the future with confidence, strength, and hope. May God bless the state of Israel, and may God bless the United States of America.
That's how he ended the speech. We'll play you other excerpts as we go through the show. The number is 310-933-5555. Yesterday, I was talking about, with a caller, I believe, about the profound ignorance that many Americans, especially those on the left, and especially black Americans, the profound ignorance they have about the Palestinian-Israeli struggle and about the history of that area. And that, I think, drives much of the hostility towards the Israelis, towards Jews that I'm finding on the part of the left. And the anti-Semitic rate within the black community is 3 times the anti-Semitic rate in the non-black Gentile community. 12% of Americans, according to the ADL, could be called anti-Semitic. However, 36% or so of blacks could be called anti-Semitic. And in the Democratic Party, only 12% of Democrats consider Bibi Netanyahu to be an effective leader. I have, obviously, a number of black friends, and I must tell you, it is really, really stunning to me how frequently I encounter very well-educated, very sophisticated people who don't know jack about that conflict, but yet believe the Palestinians have been wronged and believe that the Israelis are dominating in an unfair way. And when I ask them how, what they normally end up talking about are images that they see. Little Palestinian kids with rocks throwing them at tanks. And they just see the unfairness in that. And then when we go back and I unravel the history, and I find how profoundly ignorant they are, it is striking to me how you can passionately hold a position and yet be so profoundly ignorant about the facts and the conditions that you should know before you take your position. Who's a good guy? Who's a bad guy? And all these biblical movies that we've seen showing how the Roman Empire tried to subjugate Judea, Israel, and how resistant the easternmost province was. And then after the fall of the Roman Empire, the Ottomans took over that part of the world. You know Mark Twain, the writer? You know how he made most of his money? He made most of his money writing travel books, because travel was rare in those days, of course. So if you were able to travel somewhere and you could write about what you saw, people paid for that. He made more money off travel books than he made off his regular books. The travel books, of course, don't sell now, but the regular books do. And he traveled to this area of Palestine, and he wrote about it, and said there was just weeds and desolation. There were people living there, and Jews were living there, and Arabs were living there. But more and more Jews began to move there, late 1800s, early 1900s, purchasing the land from legitimate owners, Ottoman owners. They didn't steal it, purchased it. And when the Ottoman Empire fell after World War I, and that became a British mandate, that whole area, the British made simultaneous promises to the Arabs and to the Jews that there would be a homeland. And while the British held that area known as Palestine under a British mandate, the head of Jerusalem was named Haji al-Husseini. He was a pro-Nazi aficionado. He even raised a division of Arabs to fight on behalf of Adolf Hitler, whom he admired. This is while the British were, right before, the British took this over. And after World War I is over, it becomes a British mandate. And the British were frequently trying to prevent Jews from moving there because they knew eventually there'd be a state, and the more Jews there were, the more territory Jews could claim, according to the Arabs who were there, and the Arabs were really upset about the Jews that were coming there. And so there was conflict. 20s, 30s, 40s, there were pogroms all around that part of the world, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon. More Jews were thrown out of those countries, leaving behind property and valuables, than Palestinians were who left Israel in 1948 during the war. I repeat, more Jews were thrown out of various Muslim and Arab countries because of pogroms than what we now call Palestinians who left in 1948 because they were afraid of Israeli soldiers, which I'll come to in a minute. So, Roman Empire, fall of the Roman Empire, the Ottomans. After World War I, the British take over the area. A continuous population of Jews living there, continuous population of Arabs living there. In fact, both Jews and Arabs used to refer to themselves as Palestinians at one time. The Jerusalem Post used to be called the Palestinian Post. When I was in Jerusalem, I once saw in the dirt a coin that said Palestine on it. So, World War II is over, and there is agitation on the part of Jews for a homeland. There was a man named Theodor Herzl. He was a journalist, a French journalist. He began the modern Back to Israel movement because he saw, as a journalist, how much anti-Semitism there was in France. There was something called the Dreyfus Affair. A French officer named Alfred Dreyfus was falsely accused of treason, and the charges were all trumped up, only brought against him because he was Jewish. And it really pissed off Theodor Herzl, who was a writer, and he began to organize people for a Back to Israel movement, meaning that, arguing that we're never going to be safe, we're always going to be subjected to anti-Semitism until and unless we have our own homeland. Now, this is before the Second World War. So don't tell me that there were no Jews living there. They were already going back, a term that they called going back. So the United Nations does indeed in 1948 grant Israel a state. It also granted a state of Palestine, which was 5 times larger than what we're talking about now in terms of the West Bank and Gaza. Add up the West Bank and Gaza, it's 1/5 how big Palestine was supposed to have been had the, what we now call Palestinians, agreed to accept the United Nations deal. Now, I thought that's the organization we're supposed to go to in order for things to be resolved peaceably. The Israelis did that. And within hours of the United Nations determining that there was a state of Israel, Israel was invaded by 6 countries simultaneously. And the assumption was, even on the part of Americans, that Israel was going to get wiped off the face of the earth, and that would be that. Oh, well, interesting experiment, but it didn't work. Turned out this mighty little nation fought off all those countries, and they won. And believe me, we, the United States government, did very little to help them. There's a great book called Oh, Jerusalem. I think it's out of print now. One of my favorite books about Jerusalem. Written by a British journalist and a French journalist, neither of whom is Jewish. And they talked about how Israel came to be a state and the war and the assumption that Israel was going to lose and how they heroically fought and still to this day heroically maintain themselves in an avenue where there are 250 to 300 million people that want her driven into the sea. It's called Oh, Jerusalem. It really is something. I was lucky enough to meet some of the people in the book. And I'm not saying that the struggle was without controversy. There was a bombing in Hotel David where the British were headquartered by a group of people called the Stern Gang that you and I would now call terrorists. And it was an act of terrorism. And I don't think the Israelis are proud of it. But they stopped. And it was designed, and by the way, the British were warned that this was going to happen. They were warned that there was going to be an explosion at the British headquarters because the British were, again, preventing Jews from relocating to the area, and this pissed off a lot of Jews. So the British were perceived to be on the side of the Arabs and the Muslims by Jews many times. So I'm not saying that there weren't acts created and done by defenders of Jewish independence that you and I would not call terrorism. I'm not saying that there weren't. But they did it the right way, meaning went to the United Nations to get a declared statehood. We backed it, put pressure on other people, and Israel was granted a state in 1948 within hours, invaded simultaneously by 6 different nations, 5 or 6. And they got their butts kicked. And they still have gotten their butts kicked. But they get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. And the first war that Israel loses is the last war Israel loses. And they know it, which is why Israel will never allow Iran to get a nuke. Never, never, never. Do you blame them? My friend that I was talking to about all of this knew nothing of this. And he said, well, why don't the Israelis stop building settlements? I said, you're acting as if they won't trade land for peace. He said, what do you mean? I said, do you remember the 1967 war? He said, the 6-Day War? I said, yeah. That's how Israel got Gaza and the West Bank and Sinai Peninsula. And you know what happened? They discovered oil on the Sinai Peninsula and gave it back to the Egyptians in exchange for Egypt recognizing Israel. So don't tell me they won't give back land for peace. And when the Egyptians controlled Gaza, was there an independent Palestinian state? When the Jordanians controlled the West Bank, was there an independent Palestinian state? Hell no. Neither Egypt nor Jordan wanted a state of these rabble-rousers on their border, so they gave them no state. And now Israel is charged with giving them a state when the Arabs didn't give them one. And regarding all the Palestinians who left in the 1948 war, most of them never saw an Israeli soldier. They were told by radio, by various Arab leaders, hey guys, leave. I'll tell you what. just take off and just chill somewhere, and then when we wipe out the Jews, we're going to divide up all the booty with you so you can come back then. That's why most of them left. And then they have the nerve to say that part of the condition to recognize Israel is the right of return of all the people who left and all their relatives thereafter. Are you kidding me? He was unaware about the deal to give back the Sinai. I said, are you aware of the deal at the waning days of the Clinton administration? No. Dennis Ross, Clinton's envoy, he goes to Yasser Arafat and says, Yasser Arafat, let's do a deal. Let's get this thing done. And Bill Clinton wanted to have a legacy, kind of like what Obama's doing right now with Iran. In the waning days of his administration, Obama's trying to tie up his legacy because he knows Obamacare is not going to do it. So Bill Clinton had no real legacy. I mean, when you think of Bill Clinton's big achievement, what is it? What is it? Nothing that a lefty would be proud of. He signed the Welfare Reform Act of 1996. He cut capital gains taxes. He did NAFTA. He did GATT. How can you brag about that if you're a lefty? So Bill Clinton wanted to solve the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. He sends Dennis Ross, a really smart, able diplomat, to negotiate. And surprise, surprise, he's able to negotiate a contiguous Palestinian state. One of the grievances was that whatever it was the Israelis wanted to give us was not going to be connected. Who wants a state that was not connected? Well, this is going to be connected. And Dennis Ross was able to get the Israelis to agree to shared capital of Jerusalem. It wouldn't be the sole capital of Israel. It would be a shared capital, the capital of Palestine as well as the capital of Israel. Wow. And he got the Israelis to agree to pull out completely out of Gaza. At the time, they were still in Gaza. And to pull almost all out of the West Bank. 97% of the settlements would be dismantled. And the 3% that would remain would be in exchange for land somewhere else. But there were two conditions to which Yasser Arafat had to agree. One was the fighting would end, and the second was you have to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, neither of which Yasser Arafat could do. He was unaware of that. And so when I talk to people, especially black people, about the Israeli-Palestinian dispute, it's hard to have a conversation because the ignorance is so profound. Not understanding the history, not recognizing that Jews had a contiguous relationship with that area, not knowing who Theodore Herzl is, not knowing the British mandate, not knowing the Balfour Declaration, and also the agreement that the British entered into with the Arabs, both giving inconsistent promises, to be sure, which is part of the problem. Not recognizing that the United Nations granted an independent Palestinian state that the Arabs were not going to ever recognize because that would mean recognizing Israel. No negotiation, no recognition, never. That's what the Arab states agreed after the United Nations did what they did. And that is why you have only Jordan and Egypt, thus recognizing Israel as a Jewish state. And that's where we are right now. Israel is still subjected to bombs coming in from Gaza, ever increasingly sophisticated, aimed toward civilians. That's why you have these tunnels that are being dug from the Egyptian side up to the Israeli side. Can you imagine putting up with that from Canada or from Mexico? Lobbing bombs into the city, every now and then striking somebody in El Paso, striking somebody as far as Dallas or Houston, every now and then, and tunnels where they pop up and snatch people and pop back down and then ransom them off for hostages. Are you kidding me? Suppose that were happening in Canada. What would we do? What would we do? Frankly, I'm not sure we would be showing the restraint that these Israelis have been showing, given the disparity between their power and the power of the people around them. And still, much of the world, based on polls, places Israel in the same category of danger to the world, to civilization, to world peace, as they do Iran and North Korea. Are you kidding me? Man, somebody needs to spend some money on PR firm out of Madison Avenue because this is ridiculous.